In the previous installment, we covered numerous lost games, very well known infamies, such as Hongkong 97, Taiwan 2001, and even titles that may have not even existed at all, like Kill Switch. Those stories are about disappearance, fragments, rumors, bootlegs, and a chase to prove the game was even ever real. But not every disturbing game is lost. Some are simply unseen, obscure, and unadvertised, tucked into the forgotten corners of the internet, waiting to be explored and rediscovered. They load just fine, and what's hard is where they take you. You wake up outside Kyoto, in a field of corpses, holding a mirror that shows you just one thing. You're naked. A dead man nearby has clothes, and a few coins. You take them, because in this city, you either learn fast, or you die. This is the Cosmology of Kyoto. It looks like a point-and-click adventure, but it plays like wandering through a living museum of high-end era in Japan. Every screen is two things at once: a scene you can act in, and a footnote you can read. The game has its own in-game encyclopedia that explains what you just saw, who that priest is, why that street is blocked, what the ghost is doing, and what old story it came from. If you ignore it, the city feels random and cruel, and if you use it, everything starts to make sense in a very eerie way. Movement is simple: north, south, east, west, at the top of your screen. Click to move. Your inventory sits at the bottom, along with your coins and a thin karma meter. Karma matters. It changes what scenes you get, how people react, and what happens when you die. And you will die. To bandits in alleys, to demons that jump out from doorways, to bad choices you didn't realize were bad. But death isn't game over. It's a part of the game. And when you die, you drop into Buddhism's 6 realms of hell. Hungry ghosts, animals, asura, humans, or heavenly beings. And then you're reborn back where you fell. You can loot your old body for your stuff and keep going. The afterlife becomes another map you learn to navigate. 2 early lifelines teach you how this world works. Near the main gate, you meet Watanabe no Suna, a famous samurai. You warn him when something feels wrong. He survives a demon and gives you his spare blade, the beard cutter. It helps with thieves and a few set pieces, but it won't save you from everything. The second lifeline is a sutra scroll from a Shingon monk. Sit through his ritual, accept his offer, and you get a scripture that can drive away spirits. Inside the walls, the city opens up. The Eastern market sells food, tools, and weapons. The monk there can teach you a chant that raises karma. A moneylender will loan you coins if you leave something as collateral, which is a nice way to lose a useful item forever. The game keeps mixing normal street life with folklore horror. Help a girl accused of stealing, she'll guide you through an empty villa for shelter. Follow her inside, and you'll learn the hard way why empty houses glow at night. She vanishes behind a sliding door, and you find her hanging, bloodless. It's not random, it's a very well-known ghost tale, and the encyclopedia tells you which one. Your loose goal is to survive long enough to reach the Imperial Palace and see what's really wrong with the city. Guards won't let a commoner through, so you look for another way, a gap in the wall used for cargo. A dead noble whose robes fit just well enough to pass. Deeper in, black clouds boil over the throne room. A chimera, said to haunt the emperors, dives through lightning. If you picked up a bow, You time your shot between flashes and bring it down, and then a secret path opens. Cosmology of Kyoto doesn't hold your hand. It expects you to learn its signs. And the right path is really a set of understandings of how Kyoto worked, what people feared, what they believed would fix it. There's no big final boss. The palace collapses, and you fall into hell again. A monk you met earlier appears and helps the suffering emperor escape. He offers you the same way out. You say yes, follow the blue light, and you wake up in the human world. The city is still dangerous, still alive, but only now you understand it. And that's what made the game stick. It's education without feeling like homework, and it's scary without relying on jump scares. It lets you explore a version of Kyoto where history and folklore are on the same street, and it teaches you the rules by killing you until you learn them. And in the end, Cosmology of Kyoto is technically an educational game. A guided tour through the Heian era, customs, poetry, religion, city life, complete with an embedded encyclopedia that cites the very tales you're reenacting. But that's exactly why it unsettles people. The education isn't a classroom overlay. The visuals are dim, grainy. The audio is sparse. And for an educational game, it's obvious why Cosmology of Kyoto rattles people. It's carried by the art and sound. The visuals are dim. The characters move almost puppet-like. And it makes everything feel wrong, even when nothing's happening. The UI leaves half the screen in darkness. And when you die, it doesn't flash with game over. It escorts you to named hells. And when you consider all of that, it's not surprising why many people consider this game to be very disturbing. In the early 1990s, horror in video games was still in its infancy. Developers were just beginning to experiment with atmosphere, dread, and the idea that a game can unsettle you on a deeper level. And then came a title that promised something no game had ever attempted before. A horror adventure whose visuals were crafted by none other than H.R. Geiger, the legendary Swiss artist who designed the Xenomorph and Alien. The result was Dark Seed, a game that dropped players into a nightmare of parallel worlds, alien parasites, and dreamlike invasions. But while the game would become a cult classic, its creation was just as disturbing as its content. Plagued by a rushed development cycle, a punishing difficulty curve, and imagery so unsettling that many players never forgot it. By 1992, PC gaming was evolving rapidly. Adventure games led by companies like Sierra and LucasArts were some of the most popular titles around. Players solved puzzles, explored rich environments, and unraveled stories piece by piece. Horror in games was still rare. Games like Alone in the Dark were just beginning to experiment with creating fear through atmosphere and design. Most titles were whimsical or lighthearted. Dark Seed was different. It wasn't trying to be fun or funny. It wanted to disturb you. It wanted to crawl inside your head and stay there. And to make that happen, the developers reached out to one of the most unsettling artists in the world, H.R. Geiger. Geiger's style, known as biomechanical art, was infamous. He fused organic flesh with cold machinery, creating hybrid forms that were equal parts erotic, horrific, and alien. Of course, his most famous creation was the Xenomorph from Ridley Scott's Alien, a design that terrified audience with its fusion of sexuality, death, and the inhuman. When Geiger agreed to contribute his artwork to a video game, It was unprecedented. This was a man whose paintings hung in galleries, and whose designs haunted Hollywood. Suddenly, surreal nightmarish worlds were being brought into interactive realms. Dark Seed begins with the player taking on the role of Mike Dawson, a writer who just moved into a mysterious old mansion. And almost immediately, Mike begins experiencing terrible migraines and disturbing dreams. As the game progresses, he discovers the truth. The house is the gateway between two worlds, our familiar reality and a dark world, populated by grotesque biomechanical beings. And in this dark world, humans are nothing more than the host for alien parasites. And Mike, he had been implanted with one of those creatures, his body serving as an incubator for a new alien invasion. The player's goal is to stop this invasion before it's too late, solving puzzles across both the normal world and its horrific counterpart. On the surface, Dark Seed was a standard point-and-click adventure, but introduced elements that made it uniquely terrifying. Players had to navigate both the real world and the dark world, solving puzzles that connected between them. Actions in one would affect the other. Unlike most adventure games of the era, Dark Seed ran on a strict in-game clock. And if the player failed to complete certain actions on time, they were logged into failure, often without realizing it. Every interaction carried a sense of dread. The ordinary world felt hollow and bleak, while the dark world was grotesque, dripping with Geiger's nightmarish vision. This combination made the game feel oppressive, suffocating, less like an adventure and more like a race against the inevitable nightmare. And the horror of Dark Seed didn't just exist inside the game, it was present behind the scenes as well. The project was rushed. Developers had less than 1 year to complete it, an incredibly short time frame for a complex adventure title, and this pressure meant many puzzles were unintuitive or unfair. The time limit mechanic became punishing, forcing players to replay entire sections. Bugs and crashes plagued early versions. Some developers later admitted that the game's difficulty wasn't intentional, it was simply the result of a brutal schedule and limited resources. But ironically, these flaws contributed to its reputation. The unforgiving nature of the game only made it feel like more of a nightmare. And when Dark Seed released in 1992, it received mixed reviews. Critics praised the visual design, especially the Geiger-inspired dark world, which is unlike anything they've ever seen in gaming. But many players found the time limit frustrating and the puzzles overly punishing. Still, its disturbing imagery and unique atmosphere helped it stand out in a crowded adventure game market. And over time, Dark Seed gained a cult following. For many players, it was their first encounter with a truly unsettling horror game, one that felt like it crawled out of a nightmare. Dark Seed was a game born of nightmares, a rushed project plagued by flaws, yet elevated into legend by the power of Geiger's art. It asked players to step into a world where their body wasn't their own, where every dream hinted at invasion, and where the line between reality and the alien was paper thin. And maybe that's why it remains so haunting, because even though it was just a game, Dark Seed managed to capture something primal. The fear that your mind and body can be invaded, rewritten, consumed by something beyond human comprehension. And in the end, Dark Seed wasn't just a game you played, it was a nightmare you lived. In 1995, at the height of the CD era, most adventure games are still playing it safe. Point, click, solve puzzles, and save the world. clean, predictable formulas that sold copies and kept players comfortable. And then came The Dark Eye, a game that threw comfort out the window and dragged players into a twisted mind of America's master of horror, Edgar Allan Poe. This wasn't an adaptation, it was an experiment in digital madness. A game where you didn't just read about murder and obsession, you lived it, from both sides. Using groundbreaking clay animation and an interface that felt like it was navigating a fever dream. The Dark Eye asked players to experience Poe's most disturbing stories as both victim and perpetrator. It was psychological horror in its purest form, wrapped in technology, and made every character look like they crawled out of a nightmare. The game came from Inkscape, a new company founded by former employees of the Voyager company, pioneers in educational CD software. And this time, they weren't interested in power fantasies or escapist adventures. They wanted to create an interactive experience, software that blurred the line between game, art, and literature. For their debut title, they chose the most challenging source material imaginable, Edgar Allan Poe. Poe's stories weren't just scary, they were studies in madness, obsession, and the dark corners of the human psyche. His protagonists weren't heroes, they were murderers, grave robbers, and madmen. So how do you exactly turn that into a game? How do you make the player complicit in murder and madness? And the answer was revolutionary. You make them experience a story from both perspectives. The Dark Eye built its entire structure around a radical concept. Each of Poe's 3 featured stories, The Telltale Heart, The Cask of Amontillado, and Bernice, would be played twice, first as the victim, and then as the perpetrator. In The Telltale Heart, you first experience the terror of being stalked by a madman obsessed with your eye, the slow creaking of the floorboards, the feeling of being watched, the mounting dread. And then you played it again as the killer. And now those same moments took on new meanings. The obsession felt real. The vulture eye genuinely seemed malevolent. The murder felt justified. This dual perspective forced players to confront uncomfortable truths about sympathy, perspective, and the thin line between victim and villain. But the most disturbing element wasn't its story structure, it was how it looked. The Dark Eye used a combination of 3D graphics and clay animation, creating characters that were largely lifelike in appearance, except for their clay-modeled faces, which were often distorted. And this effect was profoundly unsettling. Characters moved like real people, but their faces were malformed and inhuman. It created an uncanny valley effect, years before that term even became widely known. The game featured an unconventional interface that matched its surreal content. It was deliberately disorienting. Clicking didn't always produce the expected result. Sometimes you move where you intended, sometimes you'd be transported somewhere unexpected. The interface itself felt unstable, unreliable, like navigating through a fever dream. This wasn't a result of poor design, it was intentionally done for psychological manipulation. The game wanted you to feel disoriented, uncertain, vulnerable, just like Poe's protagonist. When The Dark Eye released in late 1995, it divided audiences completely. Critics and consumers gave it little attention initially, although it has received some attention since. Some players were frustrated by the unconventional interface and non-linear storytelling. Others found the clay animation disturbing rather than compelling. The Dark Eye wasn't just a game. It was a literary experiment, designed as entertainment. It asked uncomfortable questions. What separates victim from villain? How thin is the line between sanity and madness? And can you truly understand horror without experiencing it from both sides? Maybe that's why it remains so haunting decades later, because The Dark Eye understood something fundamental about fear. The history of video games is full of curiosities, hidden gems, experimental projects, and strange pieces of software that blur the line between art and obsession. Most fade into obscurity, remembered only by a handful of people who played them at release. But every now and then, one of these forgotten titles resurfaces, not just because of its gameplay, but because of the mythology surrounding it. One of the strangest examples is Drowned God, Conspiracy of the Ages, a 1996 PC adventure game that promised nothing less than the revelation of humanity's hidden origins. It was a manifesto disguised as software, a piece of interactive conspiracy lore that blurred fiction and reality. And the man behind it, Harry Horse, a children's book illustrator, musician, an eccentric visionary whose life ended in tragedy. So disturbing that it left the game permanently stained with that aura of death and mystery. To understand Drowned God, you have to go back to the mid-90s. This was the age of the CD revolution. Computers were no longer limited to floppy disk. A CD could hold over 600 megabytes of data, massive at the time, allowing for pre-rendered 3D graphics, voice acting, and full motion video. This new technology birthed games such as Myst and The Seventh Guest. And this was the perfect environment for a game like Drowned God, which promised not just entertainment, but secret knowledge. Harry Horse was born in Richard Horne in 1960 in England. He adopted a pseudonym, Harry Horse, later in life, a name he used across all creative endeavors. Harry's talents varied. He was a very gifted illustrator, and in the 1980s and the 1990s, he built a reputation as a children's author. His work included The Last Gold Diggers and the Little Rabbit series, which earned him rewards and cemented his reputation as a whimsical, imaginative storyteller. But outside the children's literary world, Harry was different. He played music in punk and folk bands, wrote political cartoons, and immersed himself in the world of hidden history and conspiracy theories. This duality, children's book illustrator on one hand, conspiracy-obsessed game creator on the other, would define his career. The seed for Drowned God began in the 1980s. Harry claimed he had discovered a forgotten Victorian manuscript written in 1846 by a man named Richard Horne. The manuscript supposedly contained hidden knowledge about humanity's alien origins and the manipulation of history by secret societies. But the truth is stranger. Harry wrote the manuscript himself. In interviews, he admitted that the entire thing was forgery, a piece of pseudo-history he invented and attributed to a fictional author. For years, he kept it hidden, using it as creative inspiration. When the CD era arrived, Harry saw the perfect opportunity to turn this hoax into something greater, a video game that would let players live inside the manuscript. At the heart of Drowned God was a single claim: human history is a lie. According to the game, humanity was not a natural species, but the product of extraterrestrial intervention, an advanced alien race from the Orion constellation that had seeded humanity on Earth, guiding the development of civilization. Ancient monuments like the pyramids and Stonehenge, alien projects, religious texts and myths, elaborate cover-ups, government and secret societies, puppets ensuring the truth never surfaced. And the title, Drowned God, referred to this ancient alien power that had been buried, drowned, beneath false histories. These themes weren't invented by Harry alone. They echoed real-world conspiracy culture from the 1980s and the 1990s. Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, UFO abduction narratives, and the X-Files era about paranoia and the government cover-ups. And Harry tapped into that perfectly. When you booted up Drowned God in 1996, you were greeted with dreamlike, surreal environments. The game was structured like Myst, a first-person puzzle adventure where progress came from exploring static screens, solving riddles, and collecting artifacts. But the mood was different. Myst was serene. Drowned God was unsettling. Players would navigate cryptic alien machinery, medieval ruins infused with occult symbols, time-bending landscapes where history blurred with myth. And there were no clear answers, only hints that everything you knew about human civilization was false. The game also broke from convention with its own tone. Instead of neutral exploration, every puzzle felt weighted, as if you were uncovering something you weren't supposed to see. Drowned God released in 1996 for Windows PC. Despite being an independent title with limited backing, it made an immediate splash. It sold over 30,000 copies in the first 2 weeks. Reviewers praised its visuals, ambition, and surreal storytelling. And it quickly developed a cult following among fans of Myst-like adventures. But soon, problems emerged. The game was buggy, often crashing. The puzzles were extremely obscure, turning many players away. And its story, while fascinating, was dense and confusing, leaving casual gamers frustrated. Plans for a sequel were announced, but never realized. The reasons were never fully explained. Some suggest it was the financial troubles. Others say that Harry just simply moved on. But by the 1990s, the game had already begun fading into obscurity. After the game's release, Harry shifted back toward his career as an illustrator and writer. He continued producing children's books, political art, and music. But his personal life was darkening. Harry married a woman named Amanda, who was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a disease that progressed severely, leaving her in constant pain and limiting her mobility. But at the same time, Harry himself was rumored to be battling health problems. And friends would describe the couple as isolated and withdrawn from their own creative circles. And then, in January of 2007, everything came to a horrifying end. On January 10th, 2007, police discovered the bodies of Harry and Amanda at their home, Shetland, Scotland. What they found shocked everyone. Amanda had been stabbed 30 times. Harry had been stabbed 47 times. Their dog and cat were also found dead. That Harry, facing Amanda's illness and their shape despair, killed her, their pets, and then killed them. But the details didn't add up. Could someone really stab themselves nearly 50 times? Was this an act of desperation, or something else entirely? The case itself remains controversial to this day, with some believing it was not a suicide pact at all, it was an unsolved murder. After Harry's death, Drowned God took its new reputation. It was no longer just an obscure PC puzzle game. It was a cursed artifact, a game forever linked to conspiracy lore and real-world tragedy. And today, it survives only in fragments. Abandonware uploads, emulation, scattered YouTube playthroughs. Its sequel was never made. Its creator is gone. But unlike most games in the 1990s, Drowned God carried with it the shadow of its creator's life and death. Drowned God was built on a lie, a forged manuscript, a conspiracy invented by its creator. But the lie was compelling enough to captivate thousands. The tragedy is that Harry Horse blurred those lines so thoroughly in his art and his life that it's hard to separate them anymore. His game warned of hidden truths buried beneath history. The real hidden truth was his own suffering, concealed behind a facade of creativity. Maybe that's why Drowned God continues to fascinate people, because in the end, the most haunting mysteries aren't the ones programmed to the computer screen, but the ones left behind by the people who made them.